Mm-hmm. Fire bad. Oh boy. This one. Ha ha! Oh boy, this one. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts, the podcast. I'm your host, Michael Lucht. Today, well, let me preface this by saying, sorry there was no episode last week. There was going to be, and then this topic turned out to be much, much more unwieldy and unpredictable than I'd first given it credit for. Today's episode, this might be a two-parter. I don't know. There's quite a bit. And there's also quite a bit. It's going to take a good deal of what's that fancy word they use? Exposition. It's going to take a little explaining on some of it. But get ready, folks, because we're delving headfirst into the mysterious world of Chinese ufology, specifically Chinese UFO cults. Now, for those who are unfamiliar, China, it's communist, CCP, they run things. They're not big on religion. They tolerate it. There's like 5 main ones, I believe. I think it's Christianity, or I don't know if they split up Catholicism. I can't remember exactly, but Islam, Buddhism, Taoism. And then I think they tolerate certain folk religions. But there's this whole thing back in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and into the early 2000s, called the Qigong boom, where people started practicing Qigong. They started practicing Qigong, and certain people, one specific group in particular, started attaching Qigong to various UFO beliefs. And that group is the infamous Falun Gong. Now, Falun Gong has had some problems with the Chinese government. A lot of talk of organ smuggling, organ theft of Falun Gong practitioners. But I'm going to say now, the leader of Falun Gong, Mr. Li Hongzhi. You're also going to hear me butcher tons of Chinese words today, so get ready for that. Well, you know what? Let's just jump into the script, because I think I did a fairly decent job of explaining mostly everything, and there's something that we need to keep in mind going forward, is that there's this thing in China as well. You heard about this thing in China? There's this other thing in China called the Great Firewall, which makes internet traffic from outside China to inside China, and inside China to outside China, very fucking difficult. And I just want to preface this at the top of the show. This almost turned into another installment of Occult Crime Atlas, which there will be some of that. That may be the addendum episode to this, as most of this primarily focuses on ufology and UFO groups that are sort of ever so cautiously swinging into the realm of cult territory and or religious territory. So, however, with the Great Firewall, it makes things a little bit more difficult to study, to get truly verifiable, 100% accurate information. And of course, as always, with these, I guess you call them foreign reports, where we're going outside of English-speaking countries, there is always the possibility of translation error. So keep that in mind as well. But yes, having said that, let's jump right into it. So this episode was supposed to be a simple, if somewhat lighthearted, investigation into the digital footprints of Chinese UFO cults. I had originally planned a standard breakdown, the urban legends, modern myths, conspiracy theories, fringe social media threads, and the inevitable clash between internet folklore, and state censorship. But over the last several days, the investigation hasn't just expanded, it has collapsed to a gravity well of madness and a history I maybe sort of kind of probably wasn't necessarily supposed to find certain parts of. I don't know. We'll see. If the CCP comes knocking at my door, this will have proven that point. But we're no longer just looking at quote-unquote weird stories from the mainland. We're looking at total immersion into a shadowy twilight realm, a hypothetical history that challenges the various official narratives, as well as the very concept of verifiable data and or actionable intelligence. We're operating in the blind spots of the Great Firewall, navigating a labyrinthian maze where Cold War espionage meets rigid thought policing of modern political anxieties, and the intermingled fingerprints of intelligence agencies with the purveyors of fiction that have, for all intents and purposes, created what essentially amounts to a veritable total information blackout. That is, at least reliable information. For approximately a week and a half now, as of today, let me back up. Friday, the 20th. I believe it was Friday. Friday or Saturday. I'm lost. 23, 22. Yeah, Friday. Friday was the spring equinox. Now, the spring equinox was apparently a huge deal for quite a bit of these UFO subcultures online in China, and we will be getting into that as well. I wanted to at least wait a little bit after this interdimensional deadline of sorts to see what was going to happen. I'm assuming most people haven't heard anything crazy in the news in the last several days, so that might tell you all you need to know right there. But my brain been trapped in the darkening depths of a revolving hall of smoke and mirrors, and a land of wind and ghosts, slowly but surely descending deeper and deeper amidst an intellectual death spiral directly into the abyssal plains of brain-melting hells built upon lies. Lies, that's the old fiction, or old-fashioned way of saying it, I guess. Perhaps it's, as we examined in previous episodes, actual data disguised as fiction. Perhaps it is a large mix of verifiable or actual info mixed with totally ridiculous bullshit, disinformation, high strangeness, illusions, humanoid encounters, superpowers, and countless hours of rage and frustration, if nothing else. What I've inadvertently stumbled into is the potential culmination of decades of China's own secret history of high strangeness. A narrative involving the spectral presence of such groups as Bureau 749 and the 507 Institute. Seemingly innocuous, anonymous, nondescript organizations that spent decades attempting to quantify the human soul or retrieve things that shouldn't exist from the desolate desert sands of Lop Nur, place I'd never even heard of until just mere days ago. This isn't just some supposed UFO history. It is now, well, it was before the weekend. You're going to hear a lot of time, temporal backtracking and recorrecting, etc. But up until the spring equinox, there was an active countdown taking place. Across the Chinese web, a massive community of regular, everyday people that also simultaneously claim to be self-professed starseeds, amongst other things, seemingly average citizens, at least as far as the Chinese government is concerned, who say their true origins are actually of some otherworldly, non-human lineage. And they believe that everything from an event dubbed the 2010 Hangzhou incident, all the way up to the alleged, and as of the spring equinox, Operation Clear Sky, has all been leading to one imminent, singular moment of ontological shock. They call it the Symmetry Gate. It's strange. It sounds so close to cemetery gates, considering some of the fears associated with this supposed incident that took place, or whatever it was, when taken into consideration alongside such events as the 1997 Heaven's Gate mass suicide / exodus of consciousness in their ripping Nikes / last chance to leave planet Earth before it's recycled, well, that particular fear isn't entirely unfounded. Hence their apparent online reminders amongst each other to, quote-unquote, stay grounded. Good advice. On the flip side of this, if the Chinese government happens to consider you a true believer and or practitioner of certain, quote-unquote, alien enlightenment methods, that's what they're calling it, alien enlightenment, or if you're caught, I guess, expressing specific ideas, thoughts, concepts, which they may consider to be both suitably sci-fi, while simultaneously maybe a bit too new age, well, essentially, that's your ass. You can probably chalk a lot of this up to being Falun Gong fallout. We'll get more into that later on down the road. However, according to the calculations of the online community of so-called awakeners, that's what a lot of these folks refer to themselves as, the spring equinox of 2026, peaking at exactly 10:46 p.m. that night, marked what was considered a potential interdimensional event, a system update, some people have taken to calling it, to our reality that's allegedly been 16 years in the making. Now, I'm recording this because the very ephemeral nature of the data means it could vanish from the internet as soon as the sun crosses the solar equator. I've suddenly sort of been thrust into this maddening overarching narrative, not as a spectator, but as a record keeper of a deadline, who is even worse, on a deadline. No, I make my own deadlines, but I hold myself to a high standard, or try to at least. We only have, it's been a good 48 hours since this event supposedly took place. But this is all part of the history they allegedly could not bury. The signal they couldn't jam, and the event that thousands were out in the desert, amongst other places in China, to experience and to achieve, quote-unquote, ascension. So this episode, the veil doesn't just apparently thin by the end. When everything is said and done, it will have become synchronized, I think. In all honesty, I haven't the foggiest fucking notion as to what was supposed to happen, if anything even did. But, yeah. So, my brain hurts. Bah. So, thus, let us begin to ascend into what I've derisively decided to dub the Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast Astro Ascension Get Down, an official spring 2026 procession of the Celestial Equinox. Limited edition, made in China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. Criterion box set. Red Flags, Action Adventure, Mental Wealth, and Hellbeing. I said that on purpose. Post B-Day Sadomasochist Olympics and High Strangeness presented semi-live / half-dead broadcast spectacular. And then in parentheses, completely true, party-approved, new information indoctrination podcast at last, now with 10% less human rights violation. Brain damaged in the Forbidden City, Inner Space Program, Ram Jam, Ambulambulan, and a mispronunciation guide to the Chinese language and potential international incident extravaganza. Obviously, there's no way that I'm going to fit all that into the episode name, so I'll come up with something cheeky later. Let's start the show. The current state of UFO cults in China is defined by a complex interplay of popular fascination, online proliferation, and severe state repression under the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, if you're trying to save time. Rigid control of all religious and ideological activity. There's no official or legal space for such groups to operate, as the government only recognizes 5 state-sanctioned religions. Here they are: Buddhism, Taoism, Islam, Protestantism, and Catholicism. Each managed by a patriotic association, quote-unquote, a patriotic association, under the direction of the CCP's United Front Work Department, or UFWD. You're going to hear a lot of names of various, quote-unquote, government institutes that sound perfectly nice and innocuous, but once again, we've learned anything from regularly listening to this show, the more innocuous an organization's name is, the more likely they're up to some ill shit in the background. Any group that does not submit to this structure, including new religious movements or UFO-based belief systems, is automatically considered illegal and falls into a sort of black market. Or they are ultimately labeled a Zhijiao. Probably fucking that up, but that basically translates to evil and or heterodox cult. No bias in that name, of course. The classification places them at extreme risk of persecution, as the government continues to subject groups it deems quote-unquote evil cults to harassment, arbitrary imprisonment, and or motherfucking torture. Despite the hostile environment, public interest in UFOs and extraterrestrial contact is significant and has grown quite a bit over the last decade, even more so probably in China, particularly on social media platforms like Weibo. I believe that's how you say it. During the COVID-19 pandemic, this interest surged, with alternative theories suggesting the virus was of extraterrestrial origin, or that only benevolent aliens could end the pandemic through their superior technology proliferating widely. Some Weibo accounts dedicated to UFO theories and contactee narratives amassed over 1 million followers. Consider me jealous. Demonstrating a substantial and engaged audience for these ideas. This online following indicates that belief in UFO phenomena is not a marginal niche, but a widespread current of thought that operates primarily in digital spaces, as far as, well, I would say worldwide, but specifically, especially in China. The specific phenomena of quote-unquote UFO cults often manifest through contactee movements, where individuals claim to be in direct communication with extraterrestrial beings. There have been hundreds of such contactees in China, and their narratives frequently reference well-known figures from international UFO lore, such as the Pleiadians, or our good old buddy Ashtar Sharan. More on him in a future episode, most definitely. These contactees often present their experiences not merely as personal encounters, but as messages intended for all humanity, which can include spiritual teachings or warnings about humanity's future, or even prophecies of global transformation. This framing of UFO belief as a source of higher truth or guidance aligns with characteristics of new religious movements, which often claim to be not religions at all, but rather, quote-unquote, scientific truth. And that's the first problem these people are fucking up with. Now, these are scientific truths, quote-unquote, not yet acknowledged by the official scientific community. Now, science doesn't always know, right? We learn new things. We go back and, that's why pencils have erasers, etc. That's why some bullets have tracer rounds. The line between casual UFO interest and a quote-unquote cult, in the eyes of the state, is crossed when these beliefs coalesce into organized groups, or when contactees begin to advance what authorities perceive as quote-unquote religious claims. The moment an individual starts gathering followers, holding meetings, or establishing a structured belief system with a spiritual or prophetic dimension, they're no longer seen as mere enthusiasts, but as the leader and or members of an unauthorized religious organization. This triggers a severe response from the security services, as such groups represent an autonomous power structure outside the CCP's control, and are therefore viewed as a potential threat to social stability as well as the party's authority. Now, these fears, they're not entirely unfounded. I mean, like I mentioned, Heaven's Gate earlier. Various, we've seen what cults do. What's the worst that can happen? Oh, man, let me tell you. So, obviously, the fear is not entirely unfounded, but there's also the lack of religious tolerance. This is one of the reasons that Aum Shinrikyo became such a big problem in Japan back in the day, because the Japanese government was very, very hesitant to be like, I don't know, we can't we can't be fucking with these people's religious beliefs. That's going to cause us a lot of problems. And next thing you know, nerve gas. So, what happens? The CCP strategy for managing religious life under Xi Jinping, aka Pooh Bear, has been one of intensified control and assimilation, a process termed sinicization. This involves compelling all religious activity to align with quote-unquote core socialist values and uphold the leadership of the CCP, that being Pooh Bear, and, the party, the cadre, whatever they call themselves. New administrative measures require religious venues and leaders to actively promote Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics. That's a direct quote. Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics, effectively subjugating spiritual authority to political doctrine. For a UFO group, this would mean abandoning any claim to a higher authority than the party and reframing their beliefs to be compatible with state ideology, an impossible requirement for groups whose core tenets often challenge conventional power structures. The legal and regulatory framework has been systematically tightened to eliminate any space for independent religious expression. In 2018, the State Administration for Religious Affairs, they got one of those, was absorbed into the CCP's United Front Work Department, bringing religious affairs under the direct and overt control of the party rather than a state agency. Subsequent regulations introduced from 2019 to 2021 have increased oversight, requiring clergy to pledge allegiance to the CCP and to, quote, resist illegal religious activities and religious extremist ideology, and resist infiltration by foreign forces using religion. That's all? They're not asking much. These measures are applied universally, meaning a UFO contactee claiming to channel messages from space aliens would be seen as promoting, quote, illegal religious activities, unquote, and potentially subject to foreign infiltration, given the global nature of UFO lore. Foreign infiltration? Possibly by aliens? The enforcement of these policies is swift and uncompromising. I think I summed it up best earlier when I said, it's yo ass. Contactees who have advanced what authorities deem to be quote-unquote religious claims have been taken to police stations and detained indefinitely. This preemptive crackdown prevents the formation of stable groups. There are no public UFO cult centers or gathering places in China, thus any such activity is forced underground. The government's approach is to quash dissent before it can coalesce, as protests and unauthorized movements are generally suppressed before they can gain momentum. This means that even small, informal gatherings of UFO believers could be targeted and dispersed. Chinese government maintains an official list of banned Zhizhao cults. Sorry, I wasn't trying to put too much MSG in that. I just I've heard it pronounced several ways, and once again, you're going to hear me butcher a lot of Chinese words today. So just get ready for that. If you speak Chinese, I apologize. I try my best here. So this list of cults, evil cults or heterodox cults, was last updated in July 2022 to include 23 religious movements. And while this list primarily features Buddhist and Christian-derived groups, the absence of a specifically named UFO cult does not indicate tolerance. Criteria for being added to the list are not publicly published, and there is no procedure to challenge a designation. You can't, there's no appeals process. So this gives the state absolute discretion to label any group as a quote-unquote cult at any time. A UFO movement that gained enough prominence to attract official attention would almost certainly be added to this list, triggering a full-scale campaign of persecution against its members. The ideological opposition to UFO cults is rooted in the CCP's demand for ideological uniformity. The party maintains tight control over the state bureaucracy, media, online speech, and civil society, leaving no room for alternative worldviews that could compete with its official narrative. We rock. A UFO-based belief system with its own cosmology, prophets, and source of ultimate authority, ultimate cosmic authority no less, is inherently incompatible with this model, obviously. The state's promotion of heterosexual gender norms and its censorship of content deemed deviant, as seen in the 2025 arrest of female writers for homoerotic novels, illustrates its broader mission to police thought and culture in all its forms. UFO beliefs fall in the category of deviant, thoughts that must be managed and eliminated. In practice, the UFO cult, quote-unquote UFO cult landscape in China is a digital and shadow phenomenon. It exists in the form of viral Weibo accounts, private online forums, and personal networks of believers who communicate discreetly, largely bulletin board services. You see a lot of that popping up. The growth of these online communities is directly threatened by new regulations introduced in 2022, specifically designed to restrict internet use and online worship among religious groups. The state's sophisticated surveillance apparatus, yes, where the surveillance apparatus? Their sophisticated surveillance apparatus means that even online discussions are monitored. And users who share what are considered to be extremist or illegal religious ideas, including UFO-related prophecies, can face severe legal or even extra-legal repercussions. Now, I'm sure I don't have to tell listeners what extra-legal means, fucking black bag over your head, pulled into an SUV, extra-legal, things like that. In summary, the current state of UFO cults in China is one of suppression and just forced latency. While there is a clear and demonstrable public appetite for UFO phenomena and contactee narratives, the state's totalizing control over religious and ideological life prevents the open formation of such groups. They exist as a set of beliefs and interests rather than as an organized, public-facing institution of any kind. The moment any such group attempts to organize, it's targeted as an illegal zhijiao, and its members face severe consequences, including detention and imprisonment, extra legal. The environment is therefore not one of coexistence, but of contrasts. Low-level conflict between a state seeking total ideological control and a populace that continues to find ways to explore alternative beliefs, however precariously. Hence the various potential methods, as I mentioned earlier, of, disguising truth as fiction, putting somewhat relatively believable claims amidst just a plethora of bullshit, of just crazy horseshit. You have to find workarounds. So once again, going forward, some of this stuff is quite easily verifiable, and some of it falls in the realm of, I'm going to say online, it's almost, I wouldn't say creepypasta, I wouldn't go that far, but definitely urban legend. And let's just say, in the digital domains of urban legends as well. So it's, it's not just taking it to the streets. It is right out there online for whatever secret warehouse full of 15-year-olds hopped up on Mountain Dew they got, just watching things at all times. Now, while China doesn't have a direct one-to-one cultural clone of the Men in Black, although one could argue that that's the entire fucking government, the specific urban legends of dark-suited agents visiting UFO witnesses, that's your classic Men in Black narrative, it does have a real-life equivalent that has become the focus of similar conspiracy theories, as well as various online and cinematic lore, and that is the aforementioned Bureau 749. Often referred to as the Chinese X-Files or China's Men in Black, Bureau 749 is a shadowy organization that has transitioned from a classified Cold War-era research institute into a massive pop culture phenomenon. And that's going to be another thing you're going to see, because it almost feels like like the way that people talk about these groups, these government groups that deal with UFOs, the paranormal, high strangeness in general. It's almost like a vast propaganda campaign. Because they're sort of viewed as, I get the impression that they're sort of viewed borderline superheroes of sorts. And there has been a movie made about this group, but this is also where you get into the troubling realm of what's fiction, what's urban legend, what's, what comes from mysterious China, gatherings of different stories that have some elements of truth to them and some that are just outright like, what? And everything I've included in this episode is either out of, I would say, overall importance to the overarching narrative of UFO groups, the spring equinox event that took place, these alleged government groups that deal in high strangeness. By the way, if you haven't listened to it before, go back and check out my Chinese parapsychology episode, because that lays a lot of the foundation for some of these groups. Like, that is all stuff that's documented, like, multiple sources. Like, there's no question as to whether most of that stuff is true, that it actually happened. This is where we're getting into a murky realm. And the last reason I may have included certain accounts is because they just were fucking weird as shit. So even if they didn't necessarily happen, they'll be, if nothing else, entertaining. So in the 1970s and 80s, China went through a period of ESP fever. And high-ranking officials, including the father of Chinese rocketry, Qian Zhuxin, former co-worker of none other than Jack Parsons himself, was genuinely interested in what's called somatic science, the study of supernatural human abilities like remote viewing and telekinesis. And this is documented. This is our foundation of true stuff to build our house of bullshit on top of. Bureau 749 was an actual branch of the Chinese government, specifically under the Commission for Science, Technology, and Industry for National Defense, tasked with researching these quote-unquote special functions of the human body and unusual aerial phenomena. Now, special functions, I know that sounds like, you're going through the change, like something that might happen during puberty, but it's actually how they refer to things like telekinesis, remote viewing, etc. Director Liu Chuan, who worked for the Bureau in his youth, released a blockbuster film titled Bureau 749. It came out, sources vary, 2024, 2025. He's claimed in an interview that while much of the film is fiction, his time there involved studying things that, quote, defied conventional science, unquote, fueling the fire for various urban legends. Now, there's also a group known as Institute 507, which is a sister organization to 749 that focused on the physiological side of paranormal phenomena. Together, they are often cited by Chinese ufologists as the agencies that hide the truth from the public. There's also the very real-world concept referred to as black jails. Hush. Don't say it. In a non-supernatural sense, the term black jails is used for extra-legal detention centers in China. And while not about aliens, the men in black plainclothes security who operate them carry a similar aura of people you don't want to fuck with. If diving into the overlap between Chinese UFO cults and the Bureau 749 style of government investigation, when you do that, there's a few heavy hitters that should definitely be included. In China, these incidents aren't just seen as aliens did it. They're often intertwined with somatic sciences, the study of human superpowers, as well as traditional folklore. The secret origin stories of Bureau 749 and the 507 Institute are where China's rigid aerospace history bleeds into the surreal. While official records anchor them to the Cold War space race, the deep lore found in internal memoirs, specialized podcasts like Juer, Juer, and research dossiers on Zhihu, Zhihu, suggest their true purpose to manage a reality that was rapidly thinning, getting out of their grip. Be a better way to look at it, probably. The 507 Institute, officially the Beijing Institute of Space Medico Engineering, was established on April 1st. Oh, I hope that's, never mind, moving on. April 1st, 1968. Well, its public mission was astronaut health. Its secret origin was a direct response to the space race sorcery. That's a quote from someone, possibly Jack Parsons' old buddy. The space race sorcery of the U.S. and USSR. The legendary scientist, nope, that's wrong. Q's are a CH sound. Okay, I'm trying to get most of these right. Qian Jushin, that was Jack Parsons' old workmate. The father of Chinese rocketry. He's the central figure here. So having worked in the U.S. alongside Jack Parsons, the founder of JPL and an occultist, as I'm sure most people know, Qian returned to China convinced that human potential was an undecoded technology. He protected 507 from the Cultural Revolution, transforming it into a sanctuary for somatic science. Now, it's odd and somewhat ironic that Qian Jushin was one of the most brilliant scientists that we had in America at the time, and he was sent back to China by our government for being a suspected communist sympathizer. And look what he did. He single-handedly built the Chinese space program. How about that? All right, good job, America. Bureau 749 and Bureau 749, meanwhile, emerged from the shadows in 1974. While 507 was the laboratory, 749 was considered the field unit. It was originally a subdepartment of the Commission of Science, Technology, and Industry for National Defense, or COSTIND. According to filmmaker Liu Chuan, who served in the Bureau in the early 90s, the agency was formed to investigate events that could not be explained by conventional physics. Its secret birth was allegedly triggered by a series of high-altitude anomalies over China's western frontiers that conventional radar refused to acknowledge, precursors to the phase-shifted craft narrative. For those unfamiliar, I believe this is just another way of saying trans-medium, basically. Bureau 749 and Institute 507 are part of a modern conspiracy urban legend ecosystem. Not verified government agencies or documented research institutions in China. Despite their very bureaucratic-sounding names, there are no official records, declassified archives, academic publications, or credible investigative reports confirming that either entity existed as described in occult or paranormal case files. Instead, both names circulate primarily in internet folklore, pseudo-military mystery, and speculative fiction styled as leaked documentation. So, once again, take a lot of this with a dollop of MSG. In most versions of the narrative, Bureau 749 is described as a secretive state-linked research unit allegedly involved in investigating anomalous phenomena, ranging from unexplained biological cases and psychic anomalies to recovered artifacts and non-standard physics events, quote-unquote. The number 749 is often presented as a code name rather than a literal institutional designation, giving it an intentionally opaque, intelligence agency-like quality. Stories typically claim the Bureau operated in extreme secrecy, conducting field investigations into rural anomalies, abandoned facilities, and allegedly non-human biological signatures, often tying it closely to Cold War-era scientific paranoia. Institute 507, by contrast, is usually portrayed as a parallel or successor organization, sometimes framed as a laboratory complex rather than an investigative bureau. In these retellings, it is said to specialize in containment, classification, or experimentation related to phenomena identified by Bureau 749. Some versions describe it as a high-security facility where recovered entities, artifacts, or anomalous subjects were stored or studied. Think SCP Foundation. Hopefully there's a little more truth, or maybe not hopefully. I don't know. I'm still on the fence about that one. But, yeah. This is the Chinese equivalent of SCP. Maybe there's a little more truth to it. You be the judge. Others suggest it was focused on translation or interface work, attempting to communicate with or interpret whatever Bureau 749 had allegedly discovered. In more elaborate internet mythologies, the two institutions are linked in a kind of hidden bureaucratic network. 749 is the field arm that encounters or documents anomalies, while Institute 507 is the containment and analysis arm that processes them. This structure mirrors real-world intelligence and scientific organization models, which helps the story feel somewhat plausible, even though no such pairing is documented in any official capacity within China. A key figure of both names is that they are not traceable to verifiable institutional histories, and this may be due to these number designations. These may be considered as somewhat cover names of a sort. There are no known government science bureaus, military research divisions, or academic institutes with confirmed mandates matching these descriptions under those numerical designations. When investigated, the names tend to appear only in secondary or tertiary sources, online compilations, forum posts, speculative videos, and fiction-adjacent quote-unquote leaked file narratives. The origin of it's conspiracy theory. It's just as valid as most of it, really. The origin of Bureau 749 appears to be heavily influenced by real-world fascination with classified research programs and the global genre of secret science agencies. The number format resembles legitimate military or administrative coding systems, which contributes to its perceived authenticity. However, in documented administrative structures in China, no corresponding bureau with that designation is publicly known in scientific or defense archives. Once again, how fresh and fancy-free are the Chinese government being with their defense archives? Know what I'm saying? Oh, let's see. Across the broader legend cycle, both institutions are often retroactively connected to other anomalous narratives, such as unexplained disappearances in rural regions, alleged cryptid sightings, supposed psychotronic experiments, or recovering unknown materials. However, these connections are always retrospective narrative stitching, rather than evidence-based linkage with no primary documentation supporting them. From a cultural analysis perspective, these stories emerge from a recognizable pattern: the construction of pseudo-institutional mythologies. This involves assigning bureaucratic names and numbers to unknown phenomena to make them feel systematically studied or officially suppressed. The result is a fictional shadow research state that appears structured, hierarchical, and credible, even in the absence of any verifiable foundations. So in their most accurate framing, Bureau 749 and Institute 507 are not real organizations or confirmed historical entities. They're modern mythical constructs formed within internet conspiracy and occult fiction storytelling cultures, loosely borrowing the aesthetics of state research programs in China to create the impression of hidden scientific investigations into anomalous phenomena. According to research from Tian, which is, I know that's Chinese for heaven, but apparently it's also some site or researcher. This is another problem. It's the translation wall as opposed to the Great Firewall. They're both big factors in being a pain in my ass in researching this. There's also the Juer podcast, Juer. The early decades of these agencies involved cases that redefined national security. You have the 1974 Kunlun Giant. One of the Bureau's first major dark files involved the discovery of 2-meter-tall humanoid skeleton at an altitude of 4,000 meters in the Kunlun Mountains. The remains were accompanied by localized magnetic field collapses. 749 agents were reportedly sent to retrieve the bones and suppress local accounts of sky people who had been seen in the area since the 1950s. Then there's the 1979 ear-reading children case. Now, this is documented as an actual case. I know this one for sure. Following the Sichuan Daily report of a boy named Tang Yu who could read with his ears, 507 Institute initiated Project 507A. They brought superpowered children, quote unquote, from across China to Beijing in controlled labs. These children reportedly demonstrated teleportation of small objects like moving pills through sealed glass bottles and remote viewing of top secret Soviet installations. Now, the whole convoluted history of Chinese psychic children, it goes pretty deep. I think I get into it a little bit in the Chinese parapsychology episode, but that was so long ago, and I've lived so much life since then. There's the 1980 Lop Nor mirror. During the infamous disappearance of scientist Peng Jiamu, and that's a real case. Peng Jiamu did mysteriously disappear in the desert, the Lop Nor Desert. Bureau 749 was allegedly the lead recovery team. The secret version of the case involves the discovery of what is known as the dual fish jade pendant, an object capable of mirroring or duplicating biological matter. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this one's probably bullshit, but it's based in an actual event. Once again, the disappearance of scientist Peng Jiamu. Yeah, the 1934 and again in the 1980s dragon bone analysis by the 507 Institute. While the Yingkou fallen dragon incident occurred in 1934, this is also a fairly well-documented actual thing that happened. Researchers like those at Jihu suggest that 507 Institute acquired preserved scales in the 1980s when this happened again, apparently. Their internal analysis reportedly found that the material was neither bone nor keratin, but a quote-unquote biological lattice that vibrated in response to electromagnetic pulses, a trait later associated with quote-unquote starseed biology. We're going to get deep into starseed myth in just a bit, too. There's the 9 elders. This is, I can't help but feel that the 9 elders, these are the guys who supposedly run both of these institutes together. The 9 elders sounds very much like a recycling of a literary conspiracy known as the 9 Unknown Men, which is actually also a recycling of a much older Indian from the nation of India, mystical land of India. The 9 Unknown Men. These were, if you're going back to the very, very first original version, Emperor Ashoka, I believe that's how you say it, had assembled a team of the 9 most brilliant, capable men anywhere in the world. I believe they were all anywhere in the world in India. And they had come together to create secret books and manuals on things like aerodynamics and flight technology, etc. Has a lot to do with the folklore / conspiracy theories around the flying vimanas, etc., things like that. So I'm not too quite sure on the legitimacy of these alleged organizations are run by an alleged 9 elders. So once again, sprinkle some MSG on it. In the approach to the spring equinox, these early cases were seen as more than mere history, however, by the Awakener community online. These are seen as quote-unquote calibration tests. They believe the 507 Institute was teaching us how to receive the signal, while Bureau 749 was clearing the way for what they refer to as the symmetry gate. There's also accounts of something called the 1993 Archive, which is considered the holy grail of Chinese high strangeness documentation. Primarily refers to a collection of classified videotapes and file dossiers that director Lu Chuan reportedly encountered during his service at Bureau 749 between 1993 and 1995. While the public only sees the stylized monsters in his films, the secret history within these archives describes a reality where the Chinese government was struggling to contain a series of biological and temporal outbreaks. The most famous element of the 1993 archive is the alleged footage of, quote-unquote, Creature Zero. Sounds like something that Godzilla would fight. In fact, I'm almost positive. No, that's Monster Zero, excuse me. Okay, I backtracked that one. According to lore from Jihu and The Paper, the archive contains grainy, black and white 16mm film transferred to tape, showing a discovery made at the bottom of an abandoned mine in Red Mine City near the border of Shaanxi. Hope I'm getting that right. The tapes reportedly show a non-terrestrial entity that was neither dead nor alive, but in some state of suspended animation, they say. Researchers who viewed the footage of the 90s, including Lu Chuan by his own admission, described it as life-changing, claiming that the creature's form seemed to shift or blur when looked at directly, a hallmark of the phase-shifted biology often discussed in starseed circles. Beyond the creature, the archive documents a specific series of events known as the fading incidents. In early 1993, Bureau 749 was reportedly dispatched to a remote village in the Qinling Mountains where residents were experiencing quote-unquote partial invisibility. The logs describe individuals whose limbs or features would periodically become transparent, phenomenon Bureau 749 labeled atomic decoherence. The archive notes that the 507 Institute was brought in to ground these individuals using electromagnetic frequencies, an early precursor to the frequency grounding rituals being performed during the spring equinox for the symmetry gate. Once again, we'll get more into that in a moment. Perhaps the most sensitive part of the 1993 archive involves something called Project Ma Shan. This was an internal code name for a group of children identified by the 507 Institute as having extraterrestrial biological latencies. The files suggest that these children were not just psychics, but were effectively human-alien hybrids or starseed prototypes whose DNA has been subtly altered by the 1970s Kunlun events. Bureau 749 was tasked with training these children to remote view into other dimensions. The 93 archive reportedly contains logs of these children describing a gate that would open in the future, specifically pointing towards a symmetry of time that many researchers believe is the 2026 spring equinox, hence the term symmetry gate. Finally, the archive contains a section on mechanical possession. The theory that non-human intelligence, sounds a lot like AI is what they're talking about, could download themselves into human technology. A 1993 incident involved a mainframe computer at a provincial research center that began generating complex celestial maps and linguistic patterns that matched no known human language. Bureau 749 researchers concluded that the machine hadn't been hacked. It had been somatically bridged, as they like to say, by a signal originating from the Sirius star system. This is often cited as the first digital handshake between humanity and what the Awakener community has dubbed the architects. For the Awakener community, the 1993 archive becomes the instruction manual for the spring equinox. They believe that the creature zero and the fading incidents were early symptoms of the atmosphere thinning, and that the 1046 p.m. apex of the spring equinox is the moment when the fading becomes permanent for those who are ready to cross. The secret history of China's paranormal agencies is populated by figures who operated at the intersections of hard science and inexplicable phenomena. While Bureau 749 remains largely shielded by military classification, the 507 Institute has a well-documented roster of scientists and subjects whose work during the Qigong fever of the 1980s laid the groundwork for today's symmetry gate theories. The leadership of the 507 Institute, now the Beijing Institute for Space Medico-Engineering, was a who's who of Chinese aerospace elites. You have the aforementioned Qian Juxin, the visionary and founder. Qian provided the political and scientific umbrella that allowed supernatural research to be classified as somatic science. Remember, this is under a strictly materialist government, so he was able to effectively reclassify the scientific terms and considerations of such phenomena, and that the party eventually had no problem with it being studied. He famously stated that this research would trigger a scientific revolution greater than quantum mechanics. Then you have Zhang Zhenhuan, the administrator. The former director of the Science and Technology Board of the National Defense Science Committee, Zhang was the primary liaison between the occult researchers and the military. He served as the honorary chairman of the Chinese Academy of Somatic Science, ensuring that gifted individuals, quote-unquote gifted individuals, were treated as national strategic assets. There's a Professor Chen Xin, I think that's how you say it, an academician in the International Academy of Space Science. Chen was a key researcher into space medico-engineering, specifically looking at how the human body reacts to the vacuum of both physical space and the etheric dimensions. Ooh. There were several individuals who were considered, for lack of a better term, living weapons. However, all of their identities have been redacted for the most part, except for a few, such as Zhang Baoxing, the master of barriers. I talked about this guy in the Chinese parapsychology episode. Perhaps the most famous subject of the 1980s, Zhang was subjected to rigorous testing at the 507 Institute. In documented and CIA-monitored experiments, he reportedly demonstrated the ability to move physical objects through solid barriers, such as pulling a piece of paper out of a sealed plastic film canister or moving pills through glass. Critics called it sleight of hand, but 507 leadership recorded these as successful, quote, spatial obstacle breakthroughs. Once again, there's more on Zhang Baoxing in both the Chinese government parapsychology episode, as well as various CIA documents that can be found in the CIA reading room. There's also Sun Chulin, the biological catalyst, a researcher at the China University of Geosciences who worked closely with 507. Sun was famous for her accelerated germination abilities. She reportedly could make dry seeds sprout in minutes through focused intent. In the context of the starseed narrative, she's often cited as proof that human consciousness can directly interface with biological coding. There's the aforementioned director, Lu Chuan's 1993 to 1995, I believe it was, service. There's the Kunlun 1974 recovery team. While names remain classified, the 1974 retrieval of the Kunlun giant is cited as by the Jura podcast as the Bureau's first major success. The team allegedly consisted of a mix of geologists, PLA special forces, and sensitives, or early remote viewers, tasked with identifying the magnetic collapse surrounding the remains. There's a fellow by the name of He Hong, also known as the Objective Witness at times, PhD from Oxford, who spent 5 years at the 507 Institute. He Hong later wrote that while 95% of the cases they investigated were fraudulent, the remaining 5% were genuinely inexplicable. He noted that these cases often involved a 7.8 hertz frequency, which happens to be the Schumann resonance of the planet Earth, frequency that the Awakener community is tracking heavily, or was tracking heavily, for the spring equinox. So, that's just to give you an idea of some of the staff allegedly involved here. Now, this is where we're jumping into the shit that got me into this. The Chinese UFO cults and UFO adjacent beliefs. The detailed and as comprehensive as possible list of Chinese UFO-related cults, movements, fringe belief systems throughout relatively recent history. Usually when I go out of country like this, 1900 is my cutoff. I'm not going all the way back. Fuck that. Unless it's something specifically that has to do with that. But if I'm detailing high strangeness histories out of English-speaking countries, 1900 is my cutoff. So these range from explicitly UFO-centric religions to syncretic spiritual movements that incorporate alien contact, cosmic salvation, or extraterrestrial lore into their teachings. Where possible, I have included some belief summaries, their practices, and any known sagas or high strangeness lore surrounding them, or if they've gotten themselves into a bit of a conundrum with the government. So, first up is Galactic Federation. It's a group founded in 2012. They are identified by Chinese courts as a heterodox or evil cult and outlawed Their founder was imprisoned. Founded in 2012 by Zheng Hui, self-styled as Master Miao Lei. This group blended Buddhist salvation theology with UFOs and extraterrestrial authority. Members believed a galactic federation of alien high intelligences watches over Earth. Extraterrestrials would help humans achieve enlightenment and escape worldly suffering. Where the fuck are you guys? The founder was a kind of Earth representative of this cosmic foundation. It's a fringe spiritual movement and UFO-centric group in China that gained notoriety in the early 2010s. It's founded in 2012 by the aforementioned Zheng Hui, a woman from Nanning who held a doctorate and had a professional background in the telecommunications industry. So, no slouch. This group is best known for its bizarre synthesis of New Age exopolitics, Buddhist terminology, and Internet-era pseudoscience, eventually leading to its official designation as an evil cult by the Chinese government. The group's theology was a chaotic blend of Western UFO mythology and Eastern mysticism. Zheng Hui claimed to be the earthly representative of the Cosmic Alliance, once again called Galactic Federation. She asserted that the commander-in-chief of this federation was a 28,000-year-old Venusian, perhaps you've heard of him, named Ashtar Sharan, whom she identified as the true reincarnation of Gautama Buddha. How about that, huh? He's gone places. Zheng herself took on grand titles such as the Buddha Princess and the only owner of Light Sarira. She's got that going for her, at least. She claimed to possess 6 brains and the ability to live for 1.35 billion years. Without eating or sleeping, no less. So, her parents must be proud. One of her most famous and widely mocked claims was that followers could achieve instant Buddhahood simply by staring into her eyes, a process she marketed with the slogan, "You can become a Buddha without being troubled or tired." Because that's the problem. That's why most people don't become Buddhas. It's just so exhausting. In 2012, Zheng established the China Awakening University, an online platform used to recruit members and disseminate propaganda. The group operated primarily through the internet, of course, using blogs and chat rooms to reach a nationwide audience. Despite its sci-fi trappings, the organization functioned like a traditional personality cult. Zheng held Dharma assemblies, quote-unquote Dharma assemblies, across various cities, including Beijing and Shanghai, where she conducted initiation ceremonies. Followers were encouraged to donate, quote-unquote, offerings to fund the group's activities, which Zheng allegedly used to purchase luxury goods and real estate, for the greater good. Chinese authorities took notice of the group as it began to amass thousands of followers, and significant financial assets. That's probably the bigger problem. It's always the money. Don't fuck with the money. In 2015, the Nanning Qingzhou District Court ruled that the Galactic Federation was a cult that used superstitious fallacies, quote-unquote superstitious fallacies, to deceive the public and disrupt social order. Zheng Hui was sentenced to 8 years in prison for organizing and using a cult to undermine the implementation of the law. That's what they got her on. In Chinese popular culture, the group is often remembered more for its cringeworthy and absurd claims than for its spiritual impact. It remains a frequent subject of internet memes, particularly for its clashing aesthetics, mixing low-budget digital art of spaceships with traditional Buddhist iconography. The Chinese Galactic Federation is not a formally recognized organization, obviously, scientific body or documented UFO research institute in China. Takes a lot to be a formally recognized Chinese UFO group. There's one, and I believe it's the Chinese UFO Studies Institute. I may have that name slightly wrong, but it's something close to that effect. And they're obviously, they answer to the state and da-da-da-da. Next up is a group called, well, boy, here we go. Shui Yu Jing, or, in English, Awaken Spirit Mind Science Center. And this one's particularly special. Oh boy. This was started in 2008, and apparently they're still around. Shu Yijing, often referred to internationally as the Awaken Spirit Mind Science Center, is a spiritual organization and UFO-based movement that has faced significant repression in China. It's founded by Lin Jianzhong, sure, why not, in Taiwan. And as we'll come to find later, Taiwan and Hong Kong, a little more lax on the spiritual groups and UFO and just kind of more out there beliefs as opposed to mainland China, but that's down the road. The group's a unique mixture, we'll say, of Scientology-inspired techniques and deep space mythology. Their founder, Lin, who was born in 1957, was a former student of Scientology in Taiwan before branching out to establish his own system, which he calls consciousness-only deep communication, or, oh my god, okay, Weishi Shenzheng Gaotong. Nailed it. He introduced the movement to mainland China through a series of lectures through a series of lecture tours starting in 2008 and eventually expanding its footprint to Singapore, Malaysia, the United States of all places. We already have a Scientology, and Japan. The name Shui Yujing translates literally to Water Joy Star, a planet that Lin claims was his home in a previous life. Starseed. According to the group's lore, Lin was a prominent religious and political leader on this distant world. He teaches that when the leaders of Shui Yujing were forced to activate a planetary self-destruct device, they sent essential supplies and their brightest minds. That's a quote from him, I think. Brightest minds to Earth. Lin claims that many people living on Earth today are actually reincarnated souls from Shui Yujing, the Water Joy Star, who have forgotten their extraterrestrial origins. The primary goal of the organization is to help these starseeds recover their lost memories and return to their original spiritual state. You know, that sounds dollars to donuts, exactly like Scientology to me, but hey, what do I know? I only made it to OT2. They use something called the... They use something called the mind wave meter. The group's methodology is heavily indebted to the works of old Brother Hubbard. Central to their practice is the device called the mind wave meter, which functions almost identically to the Scientology e-meter. Practitioners use this device during deep communication sessions, process similar, very similar to auditing, to identify and clear, that's in quotations, clear spiritual blockages or trauma from past lives, including those spent on the planet Water Joy Star. Yeah, that's a bone of contention for me. It's a planet, it's a star, it's got water on it. Get your shit straight. Lin's teachings also incorporate the Buddhist concept of Yogacara, or consciousness only, rebranding it as a pseudoscientific framework for modern spiritual evolution. While the group operated semi-openly for several years as a psychological counseling or self-help center, the Chinese government began a concerted effort to dismantle it in the late 2010s. In 2022, a major police operation in Zibo, Shandong province led to dozens of arrests. By May 2025, Chinese authorities officially designated Shui Yujing, as an evil cult, launching a nationwide crackdown that reportedly identified over 4,000 members across 27 provinces. 4,000 members across 27 provinces. The state characterizes the group as a fraudulent organization that uses pseudoscience and extraterrestrial fallacies to manipulate followers and extort large sums of money for training courses and specialized equipment. Once again, dollars to donuts, Scientology. So, they're apparently still around. Or at least their leader, Lin, I don't know. He never got busted, so I guess he's still propagating the faith, if you want to call it that. Now, this next group, this is something special. Excuse me while I do my Mr. Rogers and change shoes and put on a cardigan and pour myself a glass of Metamucil, because I am fucking old. Now, this next group, Falun Gong, perhaps you've heard of them. They're the reason I would say that China is so just booty tight about these UFO belief systems. Falun Gong has been extensively covered by numerous podcasts, so I'm not going to get too deep into it with them, but just give you the basic rundown of sorts. They're also called Falun Dafa, and it's a spiritual discipline that emerged in China during the Qigong boom. Qigong boom of the early 1990s, late 80s, early 90s. Founded by Li Hongzhi in 1992, the practice combines slow-motion meditative exercises with a moral, quote-unquote moral, touch more on that later, philosophy centered on the three core tenets: truthfulness, or zhen, compassion, shan, and forbearance, ren. There's an extra one called Stimpy, but I've lost it. While it draws heavily from Buddhist and Taoist traditions, Li Hongzhi distinguishes it as a unique system of self-cultivation aimed at refining the practitioner's moral character and physical health. By the late 1990s, the movement had grown exponentially, with estimates of practitioners ranging from 70 million to 100 million in China alone. I met some Falun Gong practitioners, or devotees, whatever you're going to call it, when I was in Canada once. That's right, I've been places. And they asked me to sign some kind of thing against the, this is in the midst of their row with the Chinese government was going on, so hopefully my name didn't end up in any sort of file. Not that it matters. I guess if they were going to make a move on that, they'd have done it already. So, moving on. A number that famously rivaled the membership of the Chinese Communist Party itself. So, that's the main reason I would think that the CCP was so worried about Falun Gong. But then some stuff came out later that kind of... You'll see. I'm getting ahead of myself. The practice consists of 5 sets of exercises, including 4 standing poses and 1 sitting meditation. Central to the theology is the concept of the Falun, or law wheel, an intelligent energy entity that Li Hongzhi claims to telepathically, quote-unquote, install in the abdomens of practitioners to constantly refine their energy. Yep. Beyond the physical, the group emphasizes the accumulation of virtue and the elimination of karma through moral living. However, Li Hongzhi's teachings also include more controversial elements, such as rejection of modern medicine, viewing illness as a manifestation of one's own bad karma. This is your fault. You did this. A belief in malevolent extraterrestrial influence on human technology, and conservative stances on social issues like homosexuality and feminism. Popular guy. The relationship between Falun Gong and the Chinese state shifted from cautious endorsement to open hostility in the late 1990s. Turning point occurred in April 1999 when over 10,000 practitioners staged a silent, peaceful protest outside the CCP headquarters in Beijing, demanding official recognition and an end to state media criticism. Surprised by the group's organizational capacity, then leader Jiang Zemin declared Falun Gong a heretical cult, or evil cult, a jiajiao, and a threat to social stability. In July 1999, a nationwide crackdown began involving mass arrests, the destruction of literature, and the establishment of the 610 Office, a security agency dedicated solely to eradicating the movement. Human rights organizations and the UN have since documented widespread reports of torture, arbitrary detention, and controversial allegations of state-sponsored forced organ harvesting targeting detained practitioners. Since being banned in the mainland, the movement has established a powerful international presence, headquartered at Dragon Springs Compound in New York. The group's global visibility is driven by two major entities: the Shenyun Performing Arts, a world-renowned dance company that promotes China before communism, as well as the Epoch Times Media Group. In recent years, the movement has faced scrutiny in the West. Epoch Times has been criticized for pivoting towards far-right politics and spreading conspiracy theories, such as QAnon and anti-vaccination misinformation. Didn't see that one coming. Which critics argue is a strategic alliance intended to gain political leverage against the CCP. Additionally, former performers and members have occasionally raised concerns regarding the group's high-pressure environment and the absolute authority wielded by Li Hongzhi. The allegations of state-sponsored forced organ harvesting in China represent one of the most severe human rights accusations of the 21st century. The central claim, primarily advanced by Falun Gong researchers and independent investigators, is that the Chinese government has systematically executed large numbers of prisoners of conscience, primarily Falun Gong practitioners, but more recently including Uyghurs and other minorities. Probably fucked that up, pardon me, Uyghurs, to supply a lucrative organ transplant industry. While the Chinese government has historically admitted to using the organs of executed death row inmates, a practice they claim to have ended in 2015, they have consistently and categorically denied that prisoners of conscience are killed for their organs, dismissing the allegations as politically motivated rumors. The first major investigation into these claims was published in 2006 by former Canadian Secretary of State David Kilgour and human rights lawyer David Matas. Their report, Bloody Harvest, let it soak in, I know, nothing alarmist about that, relied on several lines of circumstantial yet compelling evidence. They noted that after the persecution of Falun Gong began in 1999, China's transplant volume skyrocketed, with hospitals advertising wait times for major organs like hearts and livers as short as 1 to 4 weeks. Now, I don't know if anyone out there has any idea what the standard wait time for organ transplantation lists are, but it's a lot fucking longer than that. Way longer. In Western countries with established voluntary donation systems, wait times are typically measured in years. The investigators also presented transcripts of quote-unquote undercover phone calls to Chinese hospitals where staff allegedly boasted that they had fresh organs from Falun Gong practitioners available because they were healthy and did not smoke or drink. In 2019, an independent people's tribunal, known as the China Tribunal, chaired by one Sir Jeffrey Nice, the lead prosecutor of none other than Slobodan It's Made of People Milosevic, delivered a landmark judgment in London. After months of reviewing testimony from over 50 witnesses, medical experts, and investigators, the tribunal concluded that forced organ harvesting had been committed for years throughout China on a quote-unquote significant scale. Let your imagination run wild, folks. The tribunal found that the sheer volume of transplants, estimated at 60,000 to 100,000 per year, could not be accounted for by China's nascent voluntary donation system. They ruled, beyond reasonable doubt, that the practice constituted crimes against humanity, and the Falun Gong practitioners were likely the principal source of the organ supply. As of 2026, international pressure on China regarding this issue has reached unprecedented levels. In August 2024, a practitioner named Cheng Pei-ming became the first known survivor to escape to the West with physical evidence. Medical imaging in the U.S. reportedly revealed that portions of his liver and lung had been surgically removed while he was imprisoned. This case led to the introduction of the Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act of 2025, I wonder what that's about. In the U.S. Congress, which mandates sanctions on individuals and entities involved in the trade. Furthermore, UN human rights experts and groups like the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China, or ETAC, continue to flag concerns that the infrastructure once used for Falun Gong is being expanded to target the, here it is again, the Uyghur, Uyghur, it's an ethnic minority in the area. Populations in Xinjiang, citing reports of mandatory DNA and medical testing for detainees that mirror earlier reports from Falun Gong practitioners. Chinese government maintains that its transplant system is fully compliant with World Health Organization standards. Who? They argue that the growth in their transplant industry is the result of technological advancement and a successful transition to a voluntary donation system. Beijing frequently characterizes the accusations as a smear campaign orchestrated by the Falun Gong movement to delegitimize. Me smart. To delegitimize the CCP, which, I don't know, outside of, the last remaining Leninist country, I don't think you have a, whatever, I don't know, moving on. While some international medical bodies initially praised China's reforms, others, such as the International Society for Heart and Lung Transplantation, has since moved to ban research papers from China out of concern that the ethical origin of the organs cannot be independently verified. Now, please keep an eye on Falun Gong / Falun Dafa. While primarily known for its political friction with the CCP, its founder, Li Hongzhi, has made famous claims that aliens are using modern technology, computers, genetics, things like this, to replace the human soul and take over human bodies. It's a very specific tech-focused alien theology of sorts that fits perfectly with the Bureau 749 era of the 1990s. It would not hurt to probably take a look at Li Hongzhi, the founder of Falun Gong. His transition from a Qigong master to a cosmic prophet is a wild ride that fits perfectly within this entire Chinese UFO cult melange, this atmosphere. While the group is often discussed today in political terms, its early theology is pure sci-fi horror. Li didn't just believe in aliens. He believed that they'd already won the first phase of their secret invasion. In a famous 1999 interview with Time magazine, Li Hongzhi laid out a narrative that sounds like a cross between The Matrix and Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Hack! Li claimed that aliens began invading Earth around the year 1900. See? Why I don't go any farther than back. That's when all the real shit started happening. They don't use lasers. They use science and technology. Which, that's what he said. They don't use lasers. They use science and technology. That seems kind of like a mixed signal to me, but whatever. According to Li, computers, airplanes, and modern medicine were introduced by aliens to make humans dependent on machines and stray from spiritual cultivation. He ain't necessarily wrong. I mean, he's wrong, but humans probably couldn't hurt to spend a little more time less reliant upon our technology and maybe a little more time on things like spiritual cultivation, whatever the fuck that means in a crazy day and age like this. What the sinister goal, believed to be the underlying reason for these tactics, is soul replacement. That's right. Li argued that the human body is the most perfect form in the universe, and aliens who lack souls want to hijack these bodies, these beautiful, perfect, just Adonis Walmart shopper bodies. He claimed that they were pushing for human cloning specifically so they could inhabit the clone bodies, since gods would not provide a soul to a clone. The vacancy would allow an alien spirit to move in. Once again, more backtracking to Scientology. I can smell Ron Hubbard. When pushed by time to describe them, aliens, Lee stated that some look like humans, but with noses made of bone. Sorry, I'm just trying to picture it. Okay. While others look like ghosts. That's what he said. He warned the interviewer that even thinking about them too much was dangerous. Okay. If that's not a control tactic, never mind. Don't think about it. Don't think. Move on. Don't think. A large part of the whole cult angle comes from how Lee has positioned himself as the only defense against this secret invasion. Lee claimed he could telepathically install the aforementioned Falun, a spinning energy wheel or law wheel, into the abdomens of his followers. And this wheel supposedly works 24/7 to purify the practitioner and protects them from alien interference. He taught that advanced practitioners would develop celestial sight via a third eye in their forehead, allowing them to see through the alien illusions of the modern world. Now, when connecting the dots between Falun Gong and Bureau 749, there is a fascinating historical irony that comes into play. Both Bureau 749 and Falun Gong were born out of the same Qigong fever of the 80s and 90s. The government was funding Bureau 749 to see if psychics could be used for espionage, while Lee was using the same cultural momentum to build a spiritual empire. Initially, the Chinese government supported Qigong groups and Bureau 749's research, allegedly. However, when Falun Gong eventually grew to over 70 million members, exceeding the membership of the Communist Party at the time, the state labeled it an evil cult. Note, within the notes, while the CCP can hardly be considered as anything even remotely close to a bastion of freedom and enlightenment, not to mention their notable history of engaging in many egregious human rights abuses, which continue to this day, it should, for the sake of transparency, also be stated that Li Hongzhi himself is no saint either. Some of his thoughts, opinions, and beliefs on topics such as race mixing, gender roles, and, homosexuals, are largely considered, quote-unquote, controversial. Even across the East-West cultural divide, they are still considered controversial, whilst also at times verging upon what one might classify as either utterly baffling or bugfuck as batshit. But in addition to those few persistently obsolete intolerances, he seems to exhibit an abundance of spiritually accumulated humility. Just the very kind one would likely require to temper the use of his numerous superhuman abilities. Astonishing powers that he's undoubtedly sure to mention within the first 30 seconds of every casual interaction, if there even can be such a thing for one such as he. Once fate hath realigned all of time and space so that every last one of such lowly beings as we shall perceive with 3 eyes, as originally intended, this magnificent specimen, when he begins to do nothing less than fucking levitate. At the same time, while he's seeing through walls and also making copies. Li Hongzhi Areno making copies of his body to follow his followers, all for their own protection, obviously, as he reads their minds and reminds them of just what a wonderful, sometimes divine, sometimes not, probably completely benevolent-ish celestial teacher / cosmic father figure, gifting all of his many disciples via what I assume to be some form of minimally invasive spirit surgery, inserting the spinning wheel of laws all up in their guts, as every well-established practitioner of energy cultivation exercises that came before him has also done. Hasn't they? Just him? Okay. After the 1999 ban, The perceived Men in Black equivalency shifted from scientists investigating UFOs to the aforementioned 610 office, specialized extra-legal security force created specifically to track down and re-educate Falun Gong members with extreme prejudice. Allegedly, even legally. No, not legally. Is it legal? I don't know. Legal, illegal. Who's counting under the CCP? Harvesting of organs. The preservation of some of the much more elderly senior officials and or more financially well-to-do, long-established party members. Allegedly, but also probably. Falun Gong is also infamously responsible for creating the traveling theatrics and cultural spectacle of the aforementioned Shen Yun, the famous dance show. Most people see the billboards and think it's just classical Chinese dance. The lyrics in the songs often reference the Red Demon. That's the CCP for those who don't understand subtlety. And the idea that modern science and evolution is a trap set by dark forces to lead humanity away from the divine. That's Falun Gong. And we've got several more cults to go. But they're the main ones that have set the way for everyone else. Now, there's another group from Taiwan called Chin Tao or True Way. These are the guys who came to my hometown, yay, and were wearing, white suits, white cowboy hats. They thought the city I lived in was Godland. It's actually Garland. So I don't know. I don't think I'm going to follow a cult leader who doesn't really know how to read very well. But that's just me. There's another group called Galactic Radio Station. If you want to know more about Chin Tao, the True Way, by the way, go back and listen to my episode on Typhonian Texas / golf rumors. That's right. They're in there. Next up, we've got the Galactic Radio Station, or Jinkong Yantai. Nice. It's a prominent Chinese language digital platform and spiritual community centered on extraterrestrial contact, cosmic awakening, and New Age mysticism. And while it presents itself primarily as an educational media outlet for UFO enthusiasts, it gained significant notoriety in late 2018 and early 2019 when it was publicly accused by Chinese scientists and state media of acting as a front for quote-unquote alien-themed cult recruitment. The platform is closely associated with one Ma Xiaoxiao, Chinese-Australian lawyer and key figure in the World Chinese UFO Federation, who serves as the station's primary voice and visionary. Who serves as the station's primary voice and visionary. The content produced by Galactic Radio Station revolves around the idea that Earth is part of a larger, benevolent, interstellar civilization, and that humanity is currently undergoing a vibrational shift, an awakening, if you will. Ma Xiaoxiao's lectures, which were widely distributed via the station's WeChat account and the Zimalaya FM podcasting app, claimed that she has regular telepathic and physical contact with various extraterrestrial beings and spiritual deities. In one of her more famous anecdotes, she claims to have been approached by Gautama Buddha, and that guy gets around, while she was buying chocolate at a festival in Sydney. Because that's the kind of guy Buddha is. He's just a regular dude, just wants to chat up some broad buying chocolate. The station's teachings blend Western exopolitics, or the study of relations between human and ETs, for those unfamiliar, with Buddhist and Taoist concepts, suggesting that starseeds, souls from other planets, have incarnated on Earth to assist in its spiritual evolution. The group entered the public spotlight in January 2019 when Liu Boyang, an astrophysics doctoral student at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, published a viral expose. Liu accused Galactic Radio Station and Ma Xiaoxiao of using pseudoscientific language to brainwash, quote-unquote, brainwash followers and build a personality cult. The guy who closely associated with the CCP, I don't know, just the irony's not lost on me. He pointed to the group's awakening lectures in Beijing and Shanghai, which reportedly charged with high entry fees. Uh, of course, as evidence of an organized effort to develop a clandestine following. Liu's critique sparked a heated debate on Chinese social media regarding a line between harmless sci-fi hobbies and dangerous spiritual movements, eventually drawing the attention of the China Anti-Cult Association and the Global Times. In response to these accusations, the accusations of being a evil cult, that is, Mao Zedong and the administrators of Galactic Radio issued a public defense, asserting that they were merely a group of ET enthusiasts and researchers. They denied any attempt to control members or engage in illegal religious activities, arguing their work was a form of spiritual exploration rather than a formal cult of any kind. Despite these defenses, the platform faced heavy censorship. Many of its social media accounts were shut down, and its presence on mainstream Chinese apps like WeChat was significantly curtailed, let's say. However, the movement continues to exist in a decentralized manner, often operating through overseas platforms like YouTube and encrypted messaging apps to reach the Chinese-speaking diaspora and mainlanders as well, using VPNs. While Galactic Radio Station is a distinct entity from the Galactic Federation, founded by Zhenghui, it shares much of the same exopolitics DNA. Critics argue that platforms like Galactic Radio Station act as a gateway or nursery for more extreme groups. By normalizing the belief that extraterrestrials are spiritual saviors who communicate through chosen human channels, these platforms create a recruitment pool for organizations that may eventually engage in more traditional cult-like behavior. The leader gets to fuck everybody. Stuff like that. Such as financial exploitation, total isolation of its members, etc. And the leader gets to fuck everybody. The so-called Galactic Radio Station does not correspond to any licensed broadcaster. I should also say that. Let's see. Who else have we got? Oh, like I said, this started off as looking into Chinese UFO cults, and this branched out into so much other shit. Like, goddamn, I hope you guys like Chinese food, and I hope that food for thought, and that you're going to be hungry for it again an hour later, because I've got about several episodes worth of material that I'm just trying to get out of the way now. It's fun. There's fun stuff in it. There's crazy weird shit in it. But, man. But anyways, yeah, I wanted to give a shout out to this book called The Stars That Pause, which is actually very useful in looking into the wider history of ufology in China. It was written by John Branscombe and Yi Izzy Yu. Excuse me. Yi Izzy Yu and John Branscombe. I highly recommend checking it out. It's got some pretty awesome stories in it, actually. So, as far as legitimate groups, well, quote-unquote legitimate, I mentioned before the China UFO Research Association, or KUFA. This is the first and most influential nationwide organization dedicated to the study of unidentified flying objects in the People's Republic of China. It was born out of the UFO fever that swept the country following the end of the Cultural Revolution. The group's origin traces back to September 20th, 1979, when students at Wuhan University, led by Xia Leping, established the China UFO Enthusiast Liaison Offices. By May 1980, it formally became a national association, eventually moving its headquarters to Beijing and gaining a massive following that included esteemed scientists, military officers, and thousands of amateur hunters across more than 40 regional branches. At its peak, KUFA was more than a hobbyist club. It operated with a degree of state-sanctioned legitimacy that is very rare for any UFO group today. It was a member of the China Association for Science and Technology, or CAST, and was championed by figures like Qian Zhuxin, the father of Chinese rocketry. The association published the highly popular magazine Journal of UFO Research. Not even going to try to pronounce the proper Chinese name, which reached a peak circulation of over 400,000 copies. However, a significant ideological shift occurred in 1988 when KUFA became a subsidiary of the All-China Qigong Science Research Association. This merger linked the study of hardware, or spaceships, with the study of software, or human consciousness and paranormal abilities, leading to a period where UFO conferences often featured Qigong masters claiming to summon saucers through meditation. A bit of a wrong turn. Many traditional scientists, like the astronomer Liu Yan, later criticized for inviting superstition into the field. KUFA was the primary body responsible for documenting and investigating China's most famous aerial anomalies. They were instrumental in gathering data on the July 24th, 1981 spiral UFO, which was witnessed by millions across 14 provinces. The association also conducted the first major field investigations into the 1994 Meng Jiaoguo incident, the Phoenix Mountain abduction, more on that later, and the 1892? Nanjing painting research. More on that later. Their methodology was a unique blend of dialectical materialism and high strangeness. While they officially sought to debunk sightings as man-made satellites or atmospheric phenomena like ball lightning, their internal debates often lean towards the extraterrestrial hypothesis, with leaders like Sun Shili and Wang Chengqing arguing that aliens were benevolent visitors who could help advance human technology. Because that's the most important thing. That's what it comes down to. The downfall of KUFA was not caused by a lack of interest, but by its political associations, which you must always be wary of in a communist regime. In the mid-1990s, the Chinese government grew increasingly wary of the whole Qigong fever movement and the rise of large independent social organizations. Because KUFA was largely tethered to the Qigong Research Association, which also housed the then exploding Falun Gong movement, it became guilt by association. Following a series of political shifts and a state-led campaign against pseudoscience in 1995, KUFA was stripped of its legal standing. In September 1997, the organization was officially compelled to disband by the Ministry of Civil Affairs, while regional branches like the Beijing UFO Research Organization continued to operate independently. The era of a unified, state-backed national UFO body was officially over. Next up, we've got a list of cases that some of these are fairly well known outside of China, and some, I never fucking heard of. And I like to study ufology in other countries to sort of get a better, more global perspective on these things. But some of these cases, man, and this is where we fall into this murky realm of what is urban legend, what is truly documented to fucking back. So first up, got the Nanjing Bright Object event. This goes all the way back to 1892. I'm making a exception here on this because this is a very well-known early case. It's regarded by Chinese ufologists as one of the most significant and well-documented ancient, quote-unquote, ancient UFO sightings in history. The event took place during the Qing Dynasty, specifically on the evening of the 24th day of the 9th lunar month, or September or October 1892, over the city of Nanjing. Unlike many historical anomalies that rely solely on vague written text, this event is immortalized in a detailed, colored painting titled Red Flaming Meteor by the renowned artist Wu Yuru. Wu was a pioneer of Chinese pictorial journalism and the founder of the Feiyinge Pictorial, a popular lithograph magazine in Shanghai that documented the wonders and the news of the era with a commitment to visual accuracy. The painting depicts a massive crowd of civilians gathered on the Zhuku Bridge, probably, I think that's how you say it, over the Qinghai River. Qinhuai River. Okay. All looking toward a brilliant egg-shaped object hovering in the night sky. The object is depicted as a red, glowing orb surrounded by a faint, fiery aura. What makes the painting scientifically intriguing is the artist's attention to detail regarding the onlookers' reactions. Many are pointing, some are shielding their eyes, and their shadows are cast on the bridge, indicating a specific, localized light source rather than a general atmospheric glow. Wu Yaoru was known for his realistic style, and his decision to document the specific moment suggests it was a major public event that gripped the city's inhabitants. Perhaps more important than the image itself is the 180-character inscription which Wu wrote on the side of the artwork, which serves as a witness report. He describes the object appearing at approximately 8 p.m., moving from the west towards the east. Crucially, Wu also notes that the object was not a meteor or a shooting star, because it paused and hovered in the sky for a significant period of time, a behavior obviously inconsistent with natural bodies. He writes, "It moved as slowly as a drifting cloud. Its light was not dazzling, but it illuminated the surroundings like a lantern." He further mentions that hundreds of people watched it for the duration of a meal, before it finally faded into the distance, noting that some spectators thought it might be a heavenly lantern, or a Kongming lantern, but dismissed the idea because the wind was blowing in the opposite direction of the object's travel. Modern researchers from the China UFO Research Association analyzed the Nanjing event in the 1980s, concluding that the object's low velocity and hovering capability ruled out astronomical phenomena such as comets or meteors. Because the event occurred decades before the Wright brothers' first flight, and long before the invention of modern flares or helicopters, it remains a true, unidentified flying object in the historical record. As definitive proof that the UFO phenomena is not a modern Western invention or a byproduct of the Cold War, but a persistent element of human history that the Chinese people have been meticulously recording for centuries. Next up is the Hainan Harvest Moon Encounter, July 24th, 1981. Commonly known in Chinese records as the July 24th, 1981 spiral UFO wave, widely considered the most significant mass sighting event in the history of Chinese ufology. While it's often associated with Hainan province due to the high density of reports there, the phenomenon was actually visible across a massive swath of central and western China, including Sichuan, Gansu, and Qinghai. On that evening, millions of people, ranging from rural farmers to high-ranking military officials and professional astronomers, witnessed a massive luminous object that defied conventional aerodynamic explanation. The event was so impactful that it effectively ended the Chinese government's media blackout on UFOs, leading to a front-page coverage in the People's Daily and other state-run newspapers. The sighting began at approximately 10:33 p.m. and lasted for nearly 7 minutes. Witnesses described a small, bright point of light that suddenly expanded into a massive, luminous spiral, resembling a spinning galaxy or a glowing whirlpool. The object moved from east to west at a relatively slow velocity compared to a meteor. Astronomers at the Zijinshan or Purple Mountain Observatory in Nanjing, recorded that the outer shell of the spiral was translucent, and the core was an exceptionally bright, pearl-like orb. Observations from different geographic locations allowed researchers to use triangulation to estimate the object's altitude at approximately 650 kilometers, or in freedom units, 400 miles, placing it well above the Earth's atmosphere in near space. Freedom units. God, I'm so brainwashed. Okay, unlike many UFO sightings that are dismissed as mass hysteria, the 1981 encounter was documented by the Chinese military and the China UFO Research Association with rigorous detail. Because the object was visible from so many different angles, scientists were able to calculate its physical dimensions, The spiral is estimated to be roughly 100 kilometers or 62 miles in diameter. The hovering appearance and the lack of a sonic boom ruled out traditional bolides or meteors. At the time, some skeptics suggested that it was a secret Soviet or American rocket launch, specifically a fuel dump from a multi-stage rocket. However, researchers noted that the object's trajectory did not match any known satellite launches or ballistic missile tests scheduled for that night, and its pause in the sky remained a point of intense debate. The Hainan encounter acted as the primary catalyst for the UFO fever that would eventually grip China in the 1980s. It fundamentally changed the public perception of the China UFO Research Association, elevating it from a fringe group of enthusiasts to a body that collaborated with state scientists. The event also sparked a cultural shift. For many Chinese citizens living in the late Cold War era, the sighting represented a crack in the door to the mysteries of the universe, moving beyond the strict materialistic education of the previous decades. It remains the gold standard for Chinese UFO cases because of the sheer volume of corroborating evidence and the fact that it was witnessed by professional observers using telescopes and tracking equipment. In the decades since, the July 24th, 1981 event has been revisited by modern skeptics who argue that it most likely was a high-altitude rocket test, possibly a secret Chinese or Soviet launch that was never officially acknowledged. They point to the spiral shape as a classic signature of a spinning rocket stage venting excess fuel in a vacuum. However, many veteran members of the original KUFA investigation team maintain that the object's duration and maneuverability remain unexplained by 1980s rocket technology. To this day, the Great Spiral of 81, as they remember it, is cited in every major Chinese ufological text as the main moment the heavenly mystery truly revealed itself to the nation. There's a lot of officials who still regret that happening to this day. Next up, we've got the Inner Mongolia green light contact in 1994. Occurring in the summer of 94, it's one of the most enigmatic high strangeness cases in Chinese ufology, often discussed alongside the famous Ming Xiaogu incident that occurred in the same year. The event took place near the border of Inner Mongolia and the Ningxia Hui Autonomous Region. Nailed it. Involving a group of railway workers and local residents who witnessed a massive, slow-moving emerald green light that appeared to interact with the terrain, and the observers themselves as well. Unlike typical lights in the sky, this encounter was described as an atmospheric saturation, where the entire landscape was bathed in a hue so intense that witnesses claimed they could see the veins in their own hands as if they were being x-rayed. That's not good. On the night of the encounter, witnesses reported a large disc-shaped object descending towards a remote section of the Baotou-Lanzhou railway line. The object emitted a pulsating green light that did not behave like a standard searchlight or beam. It functioned more like a quote-unquote liquid glow that filled the valleys. Several railway workers reported that as the light passed over them, they experienced a profound sense of physical paralysis and a prickling sensation on their skin, possibly radiation. Most notably, mechanical equipment in the vicinity, including a diesel locomotive and several battery-powered flashlights, reportedly suffered spontaneous electrical failure. Classic EM effects often cited in international UFO literature, but rarely documented with such a high number of professional witnesses in China at that time. What elevates the Inner Mongolia case from a simple sighting to a contact event, however, are the reports of telepathic or mental interference. Several witnesses interviewed later by the researchers from the China UFO Research Association claimed that during the height of the green light's intensity, they heard a humming or a rhythmic chanting seemed to originate inside their heads rather than from the air. One witness, a local herdsman, claimed to have seen shadowy figures moving within the core of the green light, though these figures remained indistinct. These accounts led some Chinese researchers to speculate that the green light was not merely a craft, but a form of energy intelligence, quote-unquote, that was scanning the biological and technological signatures of the region. Because this event occurred near a strategic railway and military testing zones, it was subject to an unofficial investigation by both provincial authorities and civilian UFO groups. Skeptics and state meteorologists proposed that the event was an extreme manifestation of green ball lightning, which I've never fucking heard of, or a rare plasma discharge triggered by the unique mineral compositions of the nearby mountains and atmospheric pressure. However, the KUFA investigators argued that the duration of the event, reported to be over 20 minutes, and the deliberate, slow maneuvering flight path of the object were inconsistent with any known plasma or meteorological phenomena. Take that. The case remains a staple of numerous Chinese UFO documentaries to this day. The Inner Mongolia incident is historically significant because it contributed to 1994 being labeled as the year of the UFO in China. The sheer frequency of high-profile cases that year, including the green light contact, the Ming Xiaogu abduction in Heilongjiang, and a major sighting over Guiyang, forced the Chinese scientific community to pivot from dismissive skepticism towards a more organized, albeit very cautious, study of unidentified atmospheric phenomena. The green light contact specifically is remembered for its visceral quality. While other cases focused on metal ships or alien beings, this event focused on the transformative power of the light itself, which witnesses described as conscious or living. Next up, you've got the Sichuan Mountain Humanoid Report in 2006. Sometimes referred to in Chinese forums as the Garza humanoid incident, is a high strangeness case that emerged from the remote high-altitude regions of the Gars Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture. Unlike the large-scale spiral sightings that were witnessed by millions, this was an intimate, harrowing encounter reported by a small group of local Tibetan herdsmen and a Han Chinese geological surveyor. The report describes a confrontation with a non-human entity that defied biological norms, characterized by a shifting physical form and an overwhelming effect on the local environment and the witness's own cognitive state. The incident began in the early autumn of 2006 when the witnesses observed a small, intensely bright orb descending into a rocky crevasse on a mountain ridge. Upon approaching the site, they reportedly encountered a humanoid figure standing roughly 7 feet tall. The most unique aspect of this report, and what differentiates it from gray alien accounts, was the description of the entity's skin. Witnesses claimed it appeared to be made of a translucent, mercury-like substance that constantly rippled. The being didn't have any discernible face, but rather a smooth, reflective surface where a face should be. When the surveyor attempted to take a photograph, his digital camera allegedly malfunctioned, and he described a mental pressure so intense it felt like his thoughts were being compressed. You know that feeling. Following the entity's disappearance, which witnesses described as simply folding into a thin line and vanishing instantly, the site exhibited several physical anomalies. Local reports, later documented by independent researchers from the Sichuan UFO Research Association, noted that the temperature in the immediate 10-meter radius of the encounter remained significantly higher than the surrounding alpine air for several hours. Furthermore, the herdsmen reported that their livestock refused to enter the specific area for weeks afterwards, exhibiting signs of extreme distress. The Han surveyor reportedly suffered from a persistent metallic taste in his mouth and bouts of vertigo for several weeks, symptoms often associated in ufology with high-intensity electromagnetic or microwave exposure. The Sichuan case faced significant hurdles in gaining national attention because it occurred in a sensitive, remote border region. Official documentation was scarce, and much of the primary evidence relied on oral testimony. Culturally, the Tibetan witnesses interpreted the event through the lens of local spirituality, initially believing that they had encountered a mountain deity, or Yul La, or a protector spirit. It was only when the geological surveyor's account reached urban UFO circles in Chengdu that the event was reframed as a close encounter of the third kind. Critics often dismiss the case as a misinterpretation of a rare atmospheric plasma event, or once again, ball lightning, interacting with the high mineral content soil of the Gars Mountain. But the consistent descriptions of a tall, reflective humanoid remains a point of fascination for Chinese researchers. The 2006 Sichuan report is often cited as a turning point where Chinese ufology moved away from the communal sightings of the 1980s towards more isolated and traumatic individual reports. It reflects a shift in the phenomenon itself, or at least in how it's reported, where encounters became more focused on the psychological and physiological impact on the witnesses. While it never achieved the Roswell-level fame of the Ming Xiaoguo incident, it remains a favorite among hardcore enthusiasts who point to the mercury skin description as evidence of a highly advanced, perhaps non-biological form of extraterrestrial scout. You got the Beijing Red Orb Streetlights of 2010. The Beijing Red Orb Streetlights of 2010 refers to a series of sightings in late summer and autumn of 2010 that captivated residents of the Chinese capital. This event occurred during a particularly intense UFO wave in China, which famously included the shutdown of Hangzhou's Zhoushan Airport just months earlier. More on that later. In the Beijing case, witnesses across multiple districts reported seeing clusters of glowing red orbs that appeared to hover at a relatively low altitude, often appearing to dance or weave between the tall city buildings and above the iconic orange glow of Beijing's streetlights. These orbs were described as having a liquid or pulsating quality, distinct from the steady lights of commercial aircraft or the rapid flickering of police drones. Witnesses, many of whom captured the events on early smartphones and digital cameras, described the orbs as approximately the size of a small car. Unlike the high-altitude spiral UFOs of the 1980s, these objects were reported as being intimately close to the urban infrastructure. One common report involved the orbs forming a triangular or diamond-shaped formation before suddenly breaking apart and moving in erratic, non-linear patterns. The most unique aspect of the 2010 Beijing sightings was the lack of sound. Despite their proximity to residential towers, witnesses noted a heavy pressurized silence accompanying the lights. This led to widespread speculation on Chinese social media platforms like Weibo that the objects were utilizing advanced propulsion systems that bypassed traditional aerodynamics. There were various theories abound about LED kites and sky lanterns being let loose, but I don't know. Those don't necessarily account for everything. Those Kongming lanterns, etc., which they naturally glow red-orange and they drift with the wind. However, the UFO researchers countered these explanations by highlighting the object's reported ability to move against the wind and their sudden high-velocity disappearances, which would be impossible for a paper lantern or some tethered kite. I don't care how many LED lights you put on it. Despite the skepticism, the frequency of the 2010 sightings prompted a cautious response from the Beijing Planetarium and members of the remnant UFO research circles. Researchers noted that the 2010 wave coincided with a period of increased military aviation testing in the North China region. Some analysts suggest that the orbs might have been a form of electronic warfare, decoys or secret unmanned UAVs being tested for urban surveillance. And while the Chinese government never released a formal report specifically on the Beijing orbs, the event is often grouped with the Hangzhou incident as part of a year that forced the Chinese public and the global community to reconsider the security and nature of China's increasingly crowded airspace. Next up, we've got the Shanghai Etheric Communications Network. This took place over a period of 2012 to 2014. The Shanghai Etheric Communication Network was a specialized tech-oriented community and UFO research circle that operated primarily, once again, from 2012 to 2014. Emerging in the wake of the 2011 Shanghai Giant Halo sightings, more on that later, where flight crews reported an object hundreds of times larger than the moon. The group sought to bridge the gap between traditional Chinese metaphysics and modern digital communication. Unlike the more religious Galactic Federation, the Shanghai Network positioned itself as a science-forward collective of engineers, IT professionals, and radio enthusiasts who believed that the aether was a literal, detectable medium which higher dimensional extraterrestrial civilizations transmitted data through. The group's core belief was that human technology, specifically fiber optics and radio frequencies, was inadvertently beginning to leak into the frequency ranges used by advanced alien civilizations. Now, members claimed that they used modified radio equipment and specific software algorithms through which they could decode messages from a group they called the Blu-ray Collective, already out of date. They argued that traditional spiritual channeling was simply a primitive form of data reception, and that the next stage of human evolution would be a technological handshake with cosmic intelligence. Their online forums were filled with complex diagrams of etheric antennas and white papers that blended quantum entanglement theories with Taoist concepts of qi. The organization reached its peak in 2013 following a localized series of electronic voice phenomena reports in the Shanghai Pudong district. The network claimed to have captured a repetitive, non-human signal that contained blueprints, quote-unquote blueprints, for a new type of clean energy. This attracted hundreds of young professionals from Shanghai's tech sector who were drawn to the group's lack of traditional religious dogma and its focus on open-source spirituality. During this period, the network organized signal hunting trips to the outskirts of the city using high-gain antennas to scan the skies while engaging in group meditations intended to tune the human brain to the incoming data. The decline of the Shanghai Etheric Communication Network began in late 2014 as the Chinese government tightened its grip on independent internet communications and quote-unquote pseudoscientific organizations. While the group was never officially labeled a heterodox or evil cult, with the same severity as, say, Galactic Federation, it was subjected to administrative cooling. Its primary servers were shut down for regulatory noncompliance, and several key organizers were invited to tea, a euphemism for police warnings, apparently, regarding the dissemination of unverified scientific claims. By 2015, the community had largely fractured. Some members drifted into mainstream AI research, while others moved their activities to encrypted international platforms, leaving behind a legacy as one of China's first true cyber UFO movements. Today, the Shanghai Etheric Communication Network is remembered as a precursor to the modern starseed and exopolitical influencers on platforms like WeChat and Weibo. It represented a unique moment in Chinese subculture where the optimism of the early 2010s internet met the ancient Chinese curiosity about the heavens. Many of their theories about the aether as a data-carrying medium have ironically found new life in Chinese sci-fi circles, particularly among fans of Liu Cixin's The Three-Body Problem, which deals with similar themes of interstellar communication and the dangers of tuning in to the wrong frequency. See, next we've got the Hainan Island Orb Abduction Report in 2017. I forgot how I classified these. I don't think it's by chronology, so the dates might be a little all over the place. But I can only assure you that as we progress through these, they're going to get progressively weirder, much stranger. I would almost say in some cases, sometimes disturbing. Sometimes there's just no fucking way that some of this is expected to be true. I leave it up to you, listeners. Some of this shit was so hard to dig up. That's why I'm still kind of fuming about how hard it was to research all this shit. But once again, translation errors, Great Firewall, etc. I won't get into it anymore. Hainan Island Orb Abduction Report, 2017. This is one of the most significant high strangeness cases in the late 2010s in China. occurring in a region that has become a hotspot for both military activity and anomalous sightings. The event reportedly took place in the dense tropical interior of Hainan province near the, Wuzhishan or Five Finger Mountain region, an area that is synonymous with strange spiritual doings transpiring and just high strangeness in general. It involved a local forestry worker and two companions who claimed to have encountered a series of sentient glowing orbs that resulted in a missing time event. Phenomenon relatively rare in Chinese UFO literature compared to the mass sightings of the previous decades. According to the primary witness, a man identified in research circles as Mr. Chin, the group was navigating a remote trail at dusk when they were surrounded by three basketball-sized orbs of light. Unlike the static red orbs reported in Beijing, these were described as having a shifting, multicolored surface that resembled iridescent oil floating on water. That's how one of the witnesses put it. Chin claimed that the orbs emitted a low-frequency hum that induced a state of extreme euphoria and paralysis. Mixed signals. As one orb approached him, he described a sensation of being pulled through a straw, followed by a total blackout. His companions, who were positioned further back, reported seeing Chin engulfed in a pillar of white light before the orbs ascended at an impossible velocity and vanished into the clouds. When Chin reawakened, he was approximately 2 kilometers away from his original location, standing in a clearing that was otherwise difficult to access. His watch and the digital devices of his companions had all stopped at the exact moment the encounter began, and they discovered they had lost approximately 4 hours of time. Upon returning to their village, Chin reportedly suffered from symptoms consistent with mild radiation poisoning, including skin erythema, including redness of the skin, extreme thirst, and a temporary loss of short-term memory. Local UFO researchers who visited the site weeks later claimed to have found vitrified soil, sand that had been superheated to such an extreme temperature that it turned into a crude form of glass, in a circular pattern where the light pillar had allegedly touched the ground. The Hainan case is particularly sensitive because the island is home to the Wenchang spacecraft launch site and significant naval installations. This has led to two competing theories within the Chinese ufology community. Skeptics suggest the quote-unquote abduction was a localized hallucination caused by the accidental exposure to high-energy microwave bursts from secret military testing. Conversely, proponents of the extra-hominid or extraterrestrial theory argue that the orbs were autonomous probes, specifically monitoring the biological diversity of the Hainan rainforest. The case was reportedly documented by a regional branch of the China UFO Research Organization, but much of the detailed data remains categorized as internal reference or NEBU and has not been fully released to the public. 2017 Hainan report is often cited as a prime example of the new wave of Chinese encounters, which favor localized, high-intensity experiences over the massive aerial displays of the 20th century. It mirrors the international UAP trend, where objects are described more as trans-medium or energy-based entities rather than metallic nuts-and-bolts craft. For Chinese researchers, the Hainan incident remains a chilling reminder that while the government focuses on the scrutiny of its skies, individuals in the country's vast wilderness continue to report interactions with phenomena that remain entirely outside the bounds of modern science, let alone everyday experience. Now, I'm about at roughly 2 hours, and I guarantee you I've got tons more Chinese high strangeness. We're going to get into several more encounters. We're going to get into some humanoid encounters. We're going to get into the aforementioned symmetry gate of the spring equinox, what happened there. And I'm going to try, don't hold me to this, but I'm going to try to get all of this out this week. So there's something to look forward to. Have some time to kill. But yeah, that's gonna do it. I'm trying to avoid going more than 2.5 hours on most of this stuff. So I'm gonna break this piecemeal, and that's gonna do it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it because it's just gonna get fucking weirder. Trust me on that one. This has been Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast, the podcast. And I'm your host, Mike Lucht, and hopefully tomorrow there'll be a new episode. That's how I'm planning this. How, we're going any unforeseen difficulties. That's what I'm shooting for. So keep an ear out for that, or an eye, or whatever sensory organ you may use to keep abreast of podcast doings of transpiring. Thanks for listening. Be back soon. Love you guys. Catch you in the next one.